Today is September 5th, 2024. Saturn won't be at opposition until September 7th, 2024, but it's clear tonight. So let's look at Saturn in a 12-inch telescope. And I'll tell you about Saturn, and in particular about Saturn's rings. I'll be back when it gets dark and Saturn is nice and high to look at Saturn. Hello and welcome to the program, Sula's Big Adventures with me, Sula. Tonight, we're going to look at Saturn in Artemis, my 12-inch Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope. I'll go ahead and tell you about Saturn while we're waiting for it to get high in the sky. Saturn is the 6th planet from the Sun and the 2nd largest in our solar system after Jupiter. Saturn is currently 1.2 billion kilometers from the Sun, or about 800 million miles. It's in Aquarius tonight, and it's shining at magnitude 0.6. It will appear to be 19 arc seconds in the telescope's eyepiece. The actual diameter of Saturn is 9.4 Earths. Saturn rotates very quickly on its axis, with one day on Saturn lasting just 10 hours and 39 minutes. But it takes Saturn 29.5 years to orbit the Sun. Ask anyone, what's the most striking object at a telescope, and they'll all agree that it's Saturn. And the reason is Saturn's magnificent rings that can be seen even in a small telescope. But Saturn's rings are not always apparent. Saturn is tilted 27 degrees relative to its orbital plane, and so as it orbits the Sun, as we see Saturn from Earth, the placement of the rings changes, and every 14.7 years the rings become edge-on, and at that time the rings are barely visible at all. This year, 2024, they're nearly edge-on, but we can still see the rings. 2025, the rings of Saturn will be edge-on, so now is a good time to look at Saturn. As with any planet, the best time to view it is at or near opposition, and when the planet is high in the sky, so you aren't looking through so much of Earth's atmosphere. When a planet is at opposition, and opposition means the planet is opposite the Sun, the planet will be in the sky all night long. Today, Saturn will rise at 8 p.m. and set at 7 a.m. With Galileo's tiny little telescope, he noted the bulges around Saturn, but he didn't know what they were. Later, astronomers concluded that Saturn had rings. And later still, they determined that the rings are composed of tiny chunks of ice, particles, rocks, and dust held together by tiny shepherd moons and gravity. The rings extend out from Saturn's surface 175,000 miles, but the rings are only 30 feet or 10 meters high. Saturn is now known to have an A through G ring, but the most obvious rings are the A and B rings separated by the dark band known as the Cassini division, which will be very hard to see with the rings nearly edge-on. Normally, though, the A and B rings and the Cassini division are easiest to detect in your telescope. 2025, you'll be lucky to even detect Saturn's rings at all. But don't worry, the rings will return with time, and you'll be able to see them in your telescope again. Also, if you can't see the rings of Saturn, you should be able to see some of Saturn's moons. Saturn has many moons. Currently, Saturn is known to have 146 moons. The biggest one is Titan, which is magnitude 8, and there are maybe 4 others that you might be able to see in your telescope, Tethys, Rhea, and Dione, that aren't nearly as bright as Titan, though. Also, Saturn has bands on it, just like Jupiter, but they're not nearly as colorful as Jupiter's bands, because Saturn is farther from the Sun and hence much colder. And the cloud tops are 95 Kelvin or negative 290 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's much high altitude haze above the bands, making them difficult to see. Another fascinating fact about Saturn is made up mostly of hydrogen and helium that's gaseous at the surface, but due to extreme pressure compressed into a liquid form farther down. This liquid hydrogen creates electrical charges in a convective motion that gives Saturn a powerful magnetic field. And recent research suggests that 1,000 tons of diamond are created on Saturn every year when lightning strikes methane in Saturn's atmosphere, turning it into carbon soot, which is pressurized as it falls, turning it into graphite and then diamond, which rains onto Saturn's core. This could all be nonsense, but it's just what I read, so don't blame me if it turns out to be completely false. Now, let's look at this magnificent planet, Saturn, after it gets dark. A beautiful evening for stargazing. Look at the Milky Way and Sagittarius. Unfortunately, the wind picked up a little bit while I was waiting for Saturn to move away from the house. But there's Saturn. I think it's moved away enough. So let's have a look at Saturn. Oh, it looks pretty good. I've got it at 333 times magnification. And I can see 4 moons. I can see the rings, but I don't think I'll be able to see the Cassini division, but I can see the bands on the surface. Pretty neat. Pretty neat. Unfortunately, my astronomy camera was destroyed in my accident recently, so I only have my Sony APS-C camera to capture video and make a picture from it. Honestly, I've seen Saturn much better. It just goes to show you how important the seeing is when it comes to planets, because the transparency is excellent. The SQM was 21.44. I can see all the stars in the Little Dipper. Milky Way is very clear, but the seeing is marginal. But I saw it, and I saw the bands, and I saw some moons, so it was pretty cool. And it's not quite at opposition, so I hope you get to see Saturn at opposition. I'll show you what I got, but I hope you get to see it better. I'll see you in the next one. Until then, get outside and enjoy the night sky. Dark skies forever. Sula signing off.